The more laws, the less justice. Marcus Tullius Cicero. All right. Good morning and welcome to another episode of the Liberty Dad Podcast, a discussion on politics and culture. I'm your host, DL, America's most objective libertarian. If you're tuning in live, thank you so much for giving me your time so early. All right. Good morning. It is. We are going to do a bill review. Now, I made a slight error on the name here. I should have been meaning to put bill review in the title so that it's clear, like, hey, what are we doing here? But that's okay. I'll update that a little bit later. No big deal. Um, I recently, probably like Friday, I saw so Jacksonville has 19 council members. One of them, Rory Diamond, he's the beaches council member, and I think he's District 13. Um, but he had made a comment about a bill that he's got, an ordinance here in Jacksonville coming up, and I was like, "Oh, hey," I was like, "When are you guys voting on?" He was like, "Next Tuesday." So I think it was Tuesday, June 2nd, I believe. It was in the Rules Committee, and the Rules Committee kind of worked out like they evaluate it, and they're like, "All right, before we send this on to City Council for them to vote on it formally, let's work some things out." So I watched the video and I did some review and I am ready to talk about this particular bill. 20 We're going to call it 2025-0138, which is its formal number. But then we'll also go and call it unauthorized aliens in Duval County. It's not really like your state or your federal bills where necessarily where they're like HB 101, undocumented immigrants in the United States Act, right? Like something like that. It's not quite like that. So it doesn't have, at least I didn't see a formal name, but we're just going to go with undocumented aliens in Duval County and we will talk about that. Um, so let's see here. Where did I want to? Yeah. So this is the ordinance 2025-138, unauthorized aliens in Duval County. So there you go. And we're going to discuss it's basically an ordinance that's related to taxpayer expenditures. So you might think, well, that's a done deal for you, right, DL? Not so much. we're going to dig into this. So let me put up on the screen here. Let's see, where are we? Do. I think I got everything set up except for this one thing, but we can fix that quick, fast, and in a hurry. So let me go do that. Do. Let's see here. There, there we go. All right, so we're gonna put this up on the screen here for you so that you can see. Bam! Oh, that's not even the article I wanted to look at. This is the article. So Jacksonville bill would prohibit use of city funds for services to undocumented immigrants. Sounds pretty straightforward, but we're going to dig into it and see if we like this bill. So I'll zoom in a little bit so that if you're watching, you might be able to read it. All right, so let's see what we got. A proposed ordinance that aims to prohibit the use of city funds for services to people living in the country illegally is moving forward in the city council. On Tuesday, the Jacksonville Finance Committee unanimously approved an amended version of Ordinance 025-0138. The bill, introduced by Councilmember Rory Diamond, would track how city, state, and federal grants are used for DEI and services that support immigrants living in the country illegally. And they're quoting Diamond. We'll hear him say these things here in just a moment. Over the last 4 years, we've been an open border, and 20 million people came in across that border, putting a border on cities and states, on like Jacksonville. I mean, we've been an open border, and 20 million came across that border, putting a border on city. I think they missed. I think they did. I don't think they transcribed that so well. Anyway, so the question was, okay, how many illegal aliens are in Jacksonville? Well, that's a good question. How many are getting services? Also a good question. And no one knows the answer. Oh, so the first thing this bill does is require that we get an answer. Mm, okay. I'm all about some transparency. Like, and one of the things that I have said that government should do is that they should uh, put more effort toward putting out information to the citizens, because I believe that we citizens are intelligent enough that if you give us the information, we can do with it as needed, right? Like, this was my big thing during COVID. I was like, just tell us what we need to know. Give us some recommendations, if you will. You don't need to lock us down. You don't need to mandate anything. You just make sure you are transparent. Okay. So, and of course they didn't do that, but that's my big thing. So far, it's not sounding too bad. Diamond said the bill is essentially the second half. We're going to get to some of this stuff here in a minute, of the Jacksonville Illegal Immigration Enforcement Act that was approved by the city council in late March. Now, that was a bill. I did a bill review on that. What was that bill review? That was episode number 480. You might remember Florida's growing police state, reviewing Jacksonville's anti-immigration bill. So that's that one. So episode 480. So if you're looking up, you can go and check it out there. That was the thumbnail, just in case you want to take a peek and see what I had to say there, but I rejected that bill, as I tend to do, because I'm tough. I'm a tough critic. Okay, if it were up to me, bills that got through would be robust, and we would minimize the unintended consequences. Anyway, so going on, it says if you are accepting essentially, who transcribed this? Like, news for jacks for real? This doesn't even make sense. And I'm going to, maybe they transcribed it correctly, but let's just listen. We'll try to remember this line here when we play this clip, because I believe it's in the same clip. If you are accepting essentially services paid for, you mean essential services, not essentially? I mean, come on. Did you graduate public school? Anyway, if you're accepting essential services paid for by taxpayer dollars here in Jacksonville and you're not in the country illegally, I think the transcription should be, if you're not in the country legally, you shouldn't be able to get it, Diamond said during a rules committee meeting. All right. Might have to take news for Jacks off my list of sources to use. I mean, goodness gracious, the first couple of paragraphs here and you've got all kind of mistakes. Who are you people? Anyway, let's move on. Before I didn't realize that when I was doing setup, because I was just kind of reading. I was like, oh, yeah, I remember he said that. But when you're reading it out loud, all of a sudden you're like, wait a minute, that doesn't even make sense. And you're a reporter. Like reporters, I, yeah, I'm sorry, I know I'm taking a detour here, but I expect reporters to be pretty solid in English, right? And review it and read it and be like, that doesn't make sense. Or maybe sometimes you put the brackets, when somebody misspoke so that, at least what you write or you publish makes sense. So if maybe he did say illegally, they could just put legally in brackets, and then I would know, okay, they're quoting him, but they're correcting it under the assumption of that's what he meant. Like there are ways to quote somebody and make it readable. Okay, I'm sorry. I'm getting sidetracked because that was so annoying. Anyway, so let's watch this first video. So this video is this is Rory Diamond. He's basically explaining his bill in the Rules Committee. It's a couple-minute video. We're gonna watch it and we're gonna pause. And I'm gonna pause, and I've got commentary along the way. So here we go.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Certainly appreciate the courtesy of the floor. A couple of months ago, Councilman Carrico came forward with his bill, essentially said, hey, if you're in Jacksonville illegally, that's against our local laws also. And it codified state and federal law into our ordinance, I was happy to support that bill, and it was absolutely correct.
Okay, so let's just start right here. Number one, local governments, and this is why, by the way, if you're watching and you're like, but I'm not in Jacksonville, stay tuned because you're going to learn a lot. Okay. Hopefully. And these kind of bills, you watch this episode, you're going to learn how to evaluate bills in your own city. Right. So this is a service to you as well. Okay. But number one, you do not need to codify state and federal law into local ordinances. That doesn't make any sense. What? Like, name like the idea is that you have your local government, then you have your state government, which oversees your local government, then you have federal law, which doesn't quite oversee state in the same way that state does your local, but kind of sort of. Like there are some powers that the federal government has that the states do not. Okay, so generally speaking, when it's a federal issue, then the federal law trumps it. Like, so if it's like a Second Amendment issue, and federal law says, "Hey, we've enshrined it, in the Constitution that you can have, a firearm," then a city can't be like, "All right, no firearms in this city ever," right? Like they can't do that because they're superseded by federal law, or sometimes there'll be a state law which supersedes, and it's enforceable. So the only thing that we need to worry about here is the state and federal law that he's referencing, whatever laws they may be, are they enforceable or are they not? But you do not. I want you to think about this. If we need to start codifying state and federal law into local ordinances, then where does that end? Does that even sound like small government? Rory Diamond is a Republican. Republicans are supposed to be small government. That's what they say they are, but they're not. So anyway, that's my first objection. I got plenty. I'm look, I'm gonna spill the beans. I'm gonna throw the cat out the bag. I do not like this bill, but you need to stay with me so you can find out why. Because I think that I'm gonna present a logical case against this bill. I'm not just one of those people that's like, oh, this bill is bad because I like immigrants, or look at how sad they are. They're crying. This is a bad bill. No, no, no. We don't do that. We appeal to logic here and morality. We do both, right? We also appeal to authority to a degree. So, like, if the Constitution says you have the right to free speech, then I'm going to defer to that in cases of free speech, right? So, if a city government is trying to, minimize the my free speech rights, I'm going to be like, nope, we're deferring to the Constitution because that's what you are under, right? So on some level, authority gets deferred to. So that's my first objection. But we're gonna get those.
This is essentially the second half of that, which says if you are accepting essentially services paid for by taxpayer dollars here in Jacksonville, and you're not in the country legally, you should be able to get it.
Oh, okay. This is exactly how government grows. Just like this. Like, oh, well, We got to do this, right? Now, and what I mean by that is, I don't know if you noticed, but he said, this is the second half. So remember, I reviewed the bill back in like several months ago in episode 480. And I said, I don't like this bill for all these reasons, right? And I laid my case out against that bill. All right. And in this particular case, I'm like, well, wait a minute. It's a second half. So I want you to raise your hand if when council passed this prior bill, if you at that time were expecting a second half. Were you? Probably not. That is how government grows. By out of nowhere being like, oh, well, we need this additional one, right? And I want you to think about it. That particular, let's go back to that. Where was that? That particular bill that I reviewed was in episode 480. Oops, did I miss? I think I might have missed some stuff, but that's okay. We'll go back here. All right, so it was in episode 480, Florida's growing police state reviewing Jacksonville's anti-immigration bill. Okay, that's what I reviewed. And at that time, I looked at it and I said, you don't need this bill because it's already covered by state and federal law. You're just adding legislation that citizens have to try to pay attention to and follow and know what it means, hope they don't violate, all that good stuff. You're just adding more legislation. You are growing government because the more bills and ordinances that you have, the more that government has something to do. Maybe they have to regulate, maybe they have to create some sort of penalties for violations. They've got to do something. And in this particular case, what did we do? We said, okay, we're going to pass this anti-immigration bill. We're basically going to say it's illegal it's illegal under Jacksonville to be here illegally under state and federal law. Like that doesn't even make sense. Like you're illegal here by state, or I'm sorry, by city too, in addition. Like that's absurd. We don't need that level for immigration. That's retarded. Okay. But then that's not good enough because now you've got this bill that says, hey, it's illegal to be here. But wait a minute. What about our taxpayer dollars? Bills begat bills, right? It's like one bill births another one. So I don't think this is really more of a second half, more as like, hey, we realize that we've got more we can do. Hooray for government. Thank you so much, small government. Now, I will say this. I am kind of torching Rory Diamond a little bit here. Please keep in mind that in many cases, when it comes to spending, I think he's really good. Not all the time, right? But he is pretty solid. Like he regularly votes no on spending bills. So I'm cool with that. But like I do anybody, if you are good on Tuesday, but you're bad on Tuesday, I will be your cheerleader. And on Wednesday, I will be your critic. And then on Thursday, if you go back to being good, I will be your cheerleader again. So, council member Diamond, if you're watching, don't get pissed because tomorrow I might be all happy for you and supportive, right? Like that's how I operate. That's what it means to be an objective libertarian. Let's go back to that video. I'm gonna have to restart it and catch back our place because I don't think I think I made a mistake on that. So let's go back here and let's see here. Where were we?
Thank you, Mr.
So let me zoom this back. Okay, so I think we're right about here. Perfect. Let's continue on.
Taxpayer dollars here in Jacksonville, and you're not in the country illegally, you shouldn't be able to get it. And that's exactly the position that we've been put in by the last federal administration. They had an open border, 20 million people crossed the border. I'm not stupid. If I were one of those people, I would have wanted to get to America also. But I would have done what my parents did, which is wait in line and come to America legally. So this bill is a response.
Okay, so let's talk about that for a second. Number one, we were not necessarily put into this position by the last administration unless you can identify specifics. More on that in a moment. Now, regarding the comment about like, hey, if, I'm not stupid, if I were, yes, I get it. People aren't dumb. If somebody's in a bad situation, America's probably looking pretty good, right? And they'll come. But then he goes on, he's like, but if I were in that situation, I would do it just like my parents. I can't speak for his parents. I don't know what circumstances they left. I don't know if they were fleeing violence, right? And they had to come over here, you know, through the legal process, claim asylum, or if they were just like, hey, you know what? Let's move to America. Sounds like a good idea, right? Like I don't know those details, but I will say this: many people come here to escape terrible situations, and they're not familiar with our laws. And therefore, they come however they can get here. Back in episode 409, the immigration rabbit hole, I did like a 4-part series on immigration, did like this immigration rabbit hole. In part 2, episode 409, I described the asylum process because what we learned is that a lot of immigrants don't know the process. Like, forget the idea that, I mean, just set it aside, that our immigration system is cumbersome and complicated. Set that aside for a moment. Even even like if you're an immigrant and you don't speak English, what is the likelihood that you really understand the right way to do it? Right? Because here's the thing. A lot of people, this is what people misunderstand. A lot of people that come to the United States legally are people that have more means from their home country than many of the people that are coming here illegally. You're not seeing too many people that are coming here illegally who are in like middle class or wealthy homes in their home country and doing and they're financially successful. You're not seeing that. Okay? A lot of these people come over here, they're already poor. And that's the reason that they come over. And I don't want to get too deep into this, but I just want to point out that this line of thinking, I would do it the right way, it denies reality by people that are living comfortably in the United States. We're living so comfortably that 40% of us are obese. And unless you are very poor, you probably haven't missed a meal. So what do I mean by that? Compare that, those people sitting around gorging their butts off on Doritos are going, and I know that's it's not really what Rory Diamond is doing. I'm just being exaggerative, a little hyperbole to make the point. But they're like, these Doritos are so good. Hey, you should come over the right way. That's what I would do. You wouldn't know what you would do because you're too wealthy. You're so wealthy, you can stuff your fat ass face and be part of the 40% of Americans that are obese. We have no idea what we would do in that situation. We are so far removed from it. It's very similar to those people that are like, they'll see some incident on the news and they're like, how come guys like they might see like I'm just gonna make something up. Maybe they see an incident on a city bus, like city transit, right? And like this crazy guy gets up and he starts attacking women and children. And then, these guys in the background who have never gotten in a fight in their life, and they're like, man, if I was there, I would. You don't know what you would have done, right? Or it's like if somebody, like if you're talking about 9/11, right? And somebody's like, well, if I was on that plane, I would have. You don't know what you would have done unless you've been in a similar situation and you can say, yep, in a similar situation, this is how I responded. I have full confidence that I would respond in this particular way. You have no idea. And so I think Rory is doing the same thing. Again, I don't know his history. I don't know when his parents came up. Like, did his parents come over and bring him over and naturalize him? Like, did he come over here when he was 2? Was he born here in America? I don't know those particular details, but I do know that so long as you're living in this country, right, and you've never had to immigrate, you don't know what you would do. So it's a total canard. And Americans, knock it off. Stop feeding your fat ass face long enough to recognize that you have no idea what you would do to flee a country where maybe your life is in danger. I think it was I don't remember the episode, but the immigration rabbit hole. I brought on a friend of mine who actually is here on asylum. He did come the right way, right? But he was, and he was claiming asylum, and that's the process he's going through. But he actually lived a fairly decent life. But there are some that have way worse lives than him. and they're going to do whatever they can. It's kind of like if I'm poor and I have no money, and I mean, when I don't mean like no money, like I've limited money, I mean zero money. Like I'm pulling out my pocket and there is lint and that's all I have. My bank account says zero. Maybe it says negative, right? I got lint in my pocket. And then I've got a 2-year old that's hungry, right? Would I be willing to steal? Maybe, right? And it's easy if you're living large, if you're doing well, to go, I would never steal. Okay, good for you, but I don't believe you because I don't think that you understand what it's like to live in those circumstances. All right, let's continue on. I don't want to belabor this too much.
Response to a crisis created by the last administration that states and cities across America are now dealing with.
Okay, so this is this general broad-based comment, right? Hey, we got this crisis. Okay, but can you quantify it? Or is this just another situation of never let a crisis go to waste? Hey, we called it a crisis. We get to do something. Man, that's like government, right? That is the nature of government. Crisis, response. It doesn't even have to be a real crisis. They could just make it up. Or they can just exaggerate what the crisis is, right? We've seen that plenty of times. COVID. Let's continue.
Some places are saying we're going to go ahead and be sanctuary cities. We're going to be sanctuary states. Look at Colorado. You can see the result of that. And I don't want that. I think the mayor wants that, but I don't want that. And I want Jacksonville to be a city that says we are going to take care of the people who are here legally and only.
Okay, so let's pause a second because he's like, Colorado became a sanctuary. Let me tell you about sanctuary state in Colorado. They became a sanctuary state in 2019. Do you know how they did it? The state literally passed HB 19-1124, which codified into their state law that they were a sanctuary state. Are there any pieces of legislation at the Jacksonville level or the Florida level that will designate that? Let me tell you the answer: no. Would one pass in a Republican dominant city council here in Jacksonville? Also, no. To bring up Colorado and be like, I don't want to be like, dude, we're not like Colorado. It's just fear mongering. Look what's happening in Colorado. And yes, Colorado's got some problems, right? They just had a lunatic go and firebomb people, and there wasn't a gun owner, there wasn't a citizen in sight with a firearm that could manage the situation. We'll leave it at that, right? And they are a sanctuary, but all these things have been by law. They're not by law here. Like we're largely a Republican. I don't want to say it. We're a Republican dominant legislative state. You've got some cities where it's more Democrat dominant, but our state legislature is Republican dominant. In Jacksonville, it's Republican dominant. We have a Democrat mayor, right? But we still have all the checks and balances, and we still know whether or not there's any bills or legislation that are coming forward to make us a sanctuary state. So if there aren't any, and it doesn't appear that any would pass, why are you talking about it? You're just making people fear. You're fear mongering for no good reason. What happens if we become Colorado? We're not anywhere close. That's absurd. Let's continue.
After everyone here is safe and legal and taken care of, are we going to start spending taxpayer money on other people? Which, by the way, will never happen because there's always going to be needs. So that's the purpose of this bill. It does a couple of things. First thing it does is it requires us to figure out what's going on because no one has any idea what's going on. We have no idea how many people in our public housing are illegal aliens. We have no idea how many kids in our public schools are illegal aliens or their parents are illegal aliens. We have no idea who's getting public assistance or any of these other things. We have no idea. No one's asking the question. So we are just in this big question mark, like a lot of other cities and states across the country. So this bill starts to get at those questions. Second thing it does, it says we're not going to use taxpayer money for that. Now,
Okay. If we have no idea how many people are here, how many illegal immigrants or children of illegal immigrants are attending our schools, how many services they're using, I'm sorry, what are we passing legislation to do? Like, what problem are you dealing with? You don't know the problem. Now, my audience knows that the first question I ask for any bill, any piece of legislation is what problem are you solving? I also do that at work, right? Like if somebody's like, "Hey, we should build this tool, we should do this thing." Okay, what problem are you solving? That's the most basic question. And it's like a question that we answer every day in our lives. Like I'm thinking about building a fence in my backyard. If you say, "Dio, what problem are you solving?" I'm solving the problem that I cannot open the door and let my dog or my child go out and feel confident that they'll be safe from other dogs or people, some level of safety. I mean, there's never a 100%, right? That's the problem. The problem is I want a cordoned area where I can let my dog and my child out and peek out and know, hey, they're safely in my yard, right? That's the problem that I'm solving. You could also say I'm solving the problem that I would like it to look nicer, right? Like I just don't think it looks good without a fence. I think it would like my property would look better with a fence. That's the problem I'm solving. We solve these problems we do this every day. We solve problems, right? And sometimes we look back and we realize, oh, we did this thing for no particular good reason, which means we did not evaluate and determine what problem are we actually solving? What are the details? What do we need to do? Back in 2017, Jacksonville passed the Human Rights Ordinance, which added sexual orientation, gender identity, and gender expression to the list of protected categories here in Jacksonville. It was local. I objected on the grounds that there wasn't a problem identified here in Jacksonville. Now, at the time, activists would point to me. They would be like, well, you need to go. I think it was the Williams Institute. They're like, go read the Williams Institute report. Okay, I did. And after reading them, I concluded that A, there was no clear problem identified because many of the claims that was suggesting there might be a problem were unsubstantiated, right? It would be like somebody saying, "Hey, I got fired." Somebody would report and say, "I got fired from my job for being gay." And I was like, "Oh, okay. Maybe that happened. Maybe it did not." Did we evaluate and substantiate that person? Because how many times has somebody gotten fired for one thing and they basically said it was because of something else, right? Or they just failed to realize the circumstances. I'll give you a great example. Somebody is late to work. They get fired, right? Maybe they had to take a loved one to the emergency room and then they're late to work. And then they get fired. And then what do they say in many cases? They'll go, "I got fired for taking my sister to the emergency room." Well, if you look into their history, you find out, no, actually, what you got fired for is because this was the 12th time that you were late. And by that time, you wore out, all the goodwill that you would normally have. Like, if that was like rarely is the case that there's no history behind it that leads up to this is why you actually got fired. But that happens all the time. I've seen it, right? Same concept here. We have to evaluate. Oh, you got fired for being gay? Well, let's look and see if that's actually the case or if that's your incorrect interpretation, right? So when I looked at those reports, I was like, no, I'm not seeing it. I did the same thing in 2021, back in episode 57. Think about that. 57. I'm on episode 520 today. 57, like about 450 episodes ago. I evaluated the U.S. Senate Bill 937, COVID-19 Hate Crimes Act. It was signed into law by President Biden. I evaluated that same rationale. I looked at it and they said, based on this report by the Stop Asian American Pacific Islander Hate, I think that was the organization, they put out a report and they said, hate crimes have increased tremendously for Asian Americans. Well, at the time, still today, but my wife and my son are Asian. So I was like, man, is there a problem that I need to be aware of? So I dug into it. I came to the same exact conclusion that I did in with the HRO. I looked and I said, there's a lot of reports here. Some of these, none of them are substantiated. So we don't know that they necessarily happened. Like, did you get a police report? Did you get some verification that this event happened as the person said it happened? On top of that, some of those things, they weren't even crimes. Like one of them, I promise you, if you go look it up, you will find this. And I think I even mentioned it on my show at the time. There was one story where somebody had submitted it and said, this is where people are committing hate crimes against me. They were an Asian person. They walked into a coffee shop. There was virtually nobody there. They order their coffee. They go sit down, and then other people come in. They look around, see the Asian, and then go grab their coffee, and then go sit on the other side of the restaurant. And that was them saying, "Hey, this," and that was included in the report. That led to a bill on hate crimes. And the argument that I made for both of those is the problem that you have is that, okay, let's say you're just being preemptive and you're like, well, maybe this could happen. We should have some legislation to deal with it. The problem with that is if there is no problem, you are imposing fear, not facts, into the citizens. You are telling them, like, if somebody thinks that their group is being um, attacked or under fire, and then you pass legislation with sloppy evidence, then what you're doing is you're telling them, we've got to do that. You're kind of confirming that there's a problem, even though there might not actually be a problem to worry about. You might be able to say, hey, we've got a lot of reports. We've sifted through them. Very, very few of them are actual violence. Some of them are just people being a little bit rude. Some of them may be nothing at all. Maybe the person that wanted to sit on the other side of the restaurant had no problem with Asians. Maybe they wanted to take a private phone call, right? Maybe they wanted to call their doctor and make an appointment about something, whatever. Right. But that's not what we're doing. We're just collecting stories or we're making stuff up and then we're passing legislation. Now, as a libertarian, I am very sympathetic to the idea of using taxpayer money, right? And if you come to me and say, I've got a bill that's going to reduce taxpayer expenditures, probably going to be all about it. However, if you come to me with bills that don't identify an actual problem, that aren't clearly going to deliver a result, or that potentially usurp civil liberties, that's more of an issue for me than worrying about, well, we might be spending taxpayer money. Let's continue.
Last committee, neighborhoods, not my favorite committee, I won't lie. The liberals there started to try to, they try to withdraw it and they just want to put their head in the sand and pretend like we don't have a crisis that has been created by the last administration. I get it. I guess I understand that that's what they campaigned on. But let's be clear. Jacksonville voted for President Trump. The number one thing President Trump ran on was to clean up this illegal immigration mess. We said, this is what we want. This is what we voted for. And that's what the bill does. It says we're not going to use taxpayer dollars for people who are not here legally.
Okay. Here's my big issue. And I see this all the time. And this, I've actually addressed, I think I addressed this in the last immigration bill. So people will say that. They'll go, Trump has a mandate because he won. Okay, fine. Let me show you a chart. Let me show you something, right? Here we go. Maybe I'll even make myself a wee bit smaller. Let me shrink myself down a little bit here so that we can totally see this. I'm gonna put myself right in the middle. There we go. All right. Let me turn off that the button up there. Okay. So now we have this graph here, these charts. What am I showing you? Maybe I need to move myself a little bit smaller. Hold on. Let me so I can let me just do there. There we go. Okay. So now you can see everything on these two charts. So what am I showing you? On the left, you have percentages. On the right, we're talking raw numbers. So on the left, what I'm doing is I'm comparing Donna Deegan's win to Trump's win. So in 2023, our Democrat mayor, Donna Deegan, she won election 52% to 47, 52.08% to 47.92%. Okay. So on the left, it shows you the percentage that she won by. Okay. And the percentage points. So if you take 52 minus 47, right? And then it shows you Trump's. So Trump won with 49%, 49.92% to 48.46%. And then if you look over to the right, we've got the margin of victory. These are the raw votes. So out of 217,398 votes, Donna Deegan, she got 113,226 compared to Daniel Davis, who got 104,172. The difference between that is compared to President Trump, who in 2024 received 236,285 votes here in Jacksonville, and Kamala Harris got 229,000 votes, 229,365 votes here in Jacksonville. The vote total being 465,650. So what we're showing here is not the votes, but it's the difference. Okay. So if you, on the left, you take the percentage and you say, what percentage did Donna Deegan win by? Subtract that, subtract Daniel Davis's, what was the spread, basically? What was the margin of victory? And you can see that her margin of victory on the left by percentage was almost 3 times greater than Trump's margin of victory. And if we look at it by raw votes, it's not quite as much, but it is still relatively significant, like about 3,000 or so, 2,000 or so. Okay, votes. Like that's the difference, the margin of victory that she had compared to Trump. What am I saying here? I am telling you that if the argument is that Trump has a mandate because of how the vote turned out, then looking at the same data, or not the same data, but looking, using the same criteria and looking at the data, Donna Deegan has an even greater mandate for 2 reasons. Number one, her margin of victory was higher, whether you look at it percentage or raw votes. And number two, she is local. Republicans, does local matter or not to you? That's the question. Because if you're telling me that the president has more of a mandate than our mayor, number one, that doesn't sound like home rule at all. That sounds like you are more invested in state and federal laws as a council member than you are locally. That's what that first tells me. Then if we look at then if you say, well, yeah, but look at how much he won by, or he won, whatever. Okay, fine. Then I look at the data and I go, well, based on the data too. So based on your position, you are a local council member. Our local council members should act like it. They should not be out here creating legislation, bigger government, so that they can go, I got to support Trump. You don't. You don't need to. Now, where you could make an argument if you want, is you could say, oh, how cooperative will the city of Jacksonville be if immigration law enforcement comes to town? And in my last review, what was that, 480, I think it was, when I reviewed the immigration bill, I pointed out that Jacksonville has a history of being very cooperative with a federal law enforcement. So that doesn't seem to be an issue. So again, as far as I can tell, this bill is not needed. Rory Diamond has not demonstrated a need for it, but he has fear-mongered. That's unacceptable. Let's continue listening to the end of what he had to say. Let's see here.
Now, Councilman Amaro came through with an amendment. I didn't fight the amendment. I understand that a win is important for me personally, to get the ball moving in this direction. We can always come back and fine tune things. And so if that's what it takes to get the bill across the finish line, I understand if this body wants to take up that amendment. The only thing I say is let's not back down from the requirement that we figure out what's happening, right? We have to know where we are. And so that's what this bill does. If you all want to take up the amendment, I'll leave it there. But this bill has been out for 2 months, so hopefully your questions are answered. There's not too much mystery to it. Appreciate the courtesy of the floor. Thank you.
Okay. So he's correct. It's been out for about 2 months. And, I think it's good that he's cordial. The amendment that he references, it did 2 things. It provided an exception for Sands Jacksonville Medical Center, now called UF Health. And then it provided an exception for sex trafficking victims, which I actually would agree with. And it gives a 1-year exemption for Kids Hope Alliance. In the rules committee, there was a lot of conversation. They had some, back and forth, and it was actually pretty interesting just to listen to them in their exchanges. They were pretty cordial. They brought up some good points. They acknowledged where, maybe they didn't understand something. So it was actually pretty enlightening. I wouldn't necessarily recommend you go back and listen to it, but if in the future you hear about a bill that you're interested in and it's maybe in the rules committee, I would encourage you to go and just kind of listen in and just see how your council members are talking and some of the concessions that they make and what they're saying. I think it's a value add. So it provides an exception to Shands Jacksonville, and it gives an exemption 1 year for Kids Hope Alliance, with the idea being, hey, in 1 year, because of the reporting requirement, we're going to have more information. Then we can figure out what we're going to do. Okay. I don't like the idea of granting exceptions because you're picking and choosing winners and losers. The other problem, because that's on top of the problem, is that we don't even know the scope of the problem. The reporting issue, I don't necessarily have a problem with. Right? I think it's good. I think the idea of a city council saying, "Hey, everybody's talking about an immigration problem. Let's see if we have one. Let's go and dig in and find out." And that's it. Just what do we got? What are we working with? Right? Okay, fair enough. But the problem is that we don't know the scope of the problem, we're presuming that there even is one. Furthermore, when you have these exceptions and exemptions, you further obfuscate the problem. So one, we're telling the city of Jacksonville, we have no idea what the scope of the problem is, but golly, we got to do something about it. Okay? I don't know what they're doing. I don't know what they're going to do about a problem they don't know yet. They don't understand, but they got to do something. But then they create exemptions and exceptions. And what does that do? Well, that means now maybe do we know if that's the larger part of the problem of illegal immigrants that might be here in Jacksonville, that might be utilizing resources that are paid for by citizens? How many of them would fall under UF Health? How many of them would fall under Kids Hope Alliance? Right. And these, or like the reason that UF Health is on there explicit is because they have a contract with the city, as does Kids Hope Alliance. So the idea was like, hey, let's make sure that we're not putting people in a bind. So they gave UF Health a full exception because UF Health has other law, like state and federal laws, that require them to give care. Like if you show up to the hospital and you got a bullet wound, they can't be like, "Are you an illegal immigrant? Tell us now, because we need to know whether we can treat you or not." They're not allowed to do that. They have to treat you. They have to. I believe the term a friend of mine said, "We have to make you ambulatory." Okay, I believe that's not like an official phrasing, but that's like the general understanding, right? We have to make you ambulatory, right? So what city council didn't want to do was they didn't want to pass a law that said, "Hey, if you have health is accepting patients and using city money to make them ambulatory, let's not put them in a bind where if they follow one law, they're in violation of the other, or vice versa." Okay, that kind of makes sense. It also kind of tells you a couple things that maybe, and they're not going to like me for this, but maybe we shouldn't be having these kind of contracts, right? Or maybe this is not a good bill in the first place. Then you have the exemption for Kids Hope Alliance, which helps children. And they were like, one of the council members was like, "Hey, what about children that, and he had something to say about it." And so then they were like, "Okay, where we have a contract, let's deal with that." So they gave an exemption to Kids Hope Alliance, basically kick the can down the road. And then, of course, there's the sex trafficking victims, for which I think if you're going to pass this kind of legislation, you absolutely should have that kind of exception. However, I just want to point out something. You might not like me, but stay with me. You have an exemption for sex trafficking victims who are generally children, right? Like not always, but in the US, it's frequently children. I think it was actually sex and labor trafficking. So basically you're talking about people that are here against their will. So why not children in general? Let's think about this. Let's say I come here. I'm an illegal immigrant. Let's say me and my wife come here. We're both illegal immigrants. We sneak in, right? We don't even go through the right process and just not show up to our dates. We snuck in. Then we have a kid. Or maybe we brought a kid, right? But whatever the case, let's say we have a 5, 6, 7-year-old child. Okay, we're here illegally. And the child here. Well, like, aren't they basically in the same position, the same situation as a sex trafficking victim? They don't have the autonomy to determine where they should be and where the so why don't we have a full-on exemption for children altogether? Which then kind of suggests why bother? Because if we're given an exemption to make sure that people aren't violating other laws or forced into violating a law, and then if we're giving an exemption to where else we have contracts, at least to kick the can down the road, and then if we consider that hey, sex trafficking, trafficking victims, they're here against their will. Well, aren't children here against their will as well? So then at some point, we've whittled this down to virtually not dealing with whatever problem that we still have not even identified. You see the problems with this bill? Like this just full of holes. It looks like Swiss cheese. All right, let's get to some comments here, and then we'll go to break. We'll come back. We'll talk a little bit more about this bill. So let's see what you guys are up to and saying here. You guys are saying a lot apparently. Yay, Bill, says Keith. I like your enthusiasm. Let's see. That Liberty Lady, but DL, society says we have to have laws or it will be anarchy. There's no way that more laws mean less justice. Reference to the opening comment. I mean, yes, that's sarcasm, by the way, folks. Yes, a lot of people will act and be like, "Oh, we need laws," but the real question is, how many laws do we need? And do we actually need this law? Is it solving a real problem? Or more importantly, if there is a problem, can it be solved on the free market some other way? We never asked that question, do we? Let's see what else. Oddsman sticking up for News for Jax. AI is not that good at transcribing stuff, DL. Or maybe he or she wasn't sticking up for News for Jax if they're using AI to transcribe. No, just kidding. If you're using AI, I think that's a good thing, but you should always pay attention. And I think that if you're a journalist, you should read before you publish something and say, does this make friggin' sense? And try to do your best to make it make sense so that when I read, I don't think you're a bumbling idiot. So, I mean, yes, News for Jax, you should write your articles so that I like them. That's basically what I'm saying. Let's see what else. Yes, that Liberty Lady, GOP lies. They love big government just as much as Democrats. That's why I call them all Republicrats. Absolutely. Let's see. Keith points out, DL, there are more Dems in Jacksonville per the supervisor of elections page. I have not checked the balance on our city council. The city council is actually overwhelmingly Republican. So there's that. I don't know the number off the top of my head. Let's see. Some of these comments are a little funny. I'm trying to read them. You guys are a trip. Let's see. Some criticism of mom's demand. I'm not going to complain. Yes, that Liberty Lady points out local. Yes, focus local, but you got to pay attention. That's why I do these bill reviews so that you know what to look for. I'm looking at just see here some conversations among you guys and try not to go down too many rabbit holes here. Let's see here. Your children will be taught by AI. Fun fact, my child already is taught by AI, and me and the school. We actually, we were doing an online course. He has online homework that he has to do. And we were doing some homework and he was struggling with some words because he didn't understand what the meaning of the words was. And in this particular system, you couldn't go back to where they explained it. And so I was like, well, crap, now I have to explain these words to a 6-year-old. Now I can explain things to an adult, which I'm good at, but I don't really have a lot of experience explaining things to children, like in child-friendly ways, and especially definitions of a word. And so then I got onto AI and I was like, explain this word like I was 5. And then it was like, suppose you have a toy car, blah, blah, blah. And I was like, that's really good. So I was using AI myself. So no shade at anybody that uses AI. I think you absolutely should. But I will poke fun a little bit. And if I read your news articles, I'm going to criticize you. So there's that. All right, folks, let's go to a little intermission here and we'll be back and we'll dive into some more. Hey, Liberty fam, do me a favor. If you enjoy the show, be sure to hit the like and subscribe button to my channel. And for the really serious folks out there, I want you to hit that bell so that you never miss an episode. By the way, if you want to support the show, head over to libertydad.locals.com and sign up. For $5, you can be part of this show. There, I'll engage supporters of the show. We'll discuss topics that you want me to talk about, response videos that you would like to see, or anything related to the show. And I'll even have a monthly subscribers only episode. By the way, I'm always looking for dads to join me for Dad Talk. That's my series where I invite everyday dads on to talk about what's important to them in the context of being a dad. No argument, no debate, and dads choose the topic. It's my way of raising dad voices. If you're a dad or you know a dad who has something to say, let's get connected. Episodes air live on Friday mornings or Friday evenings, whichever works best for dads. All right, let's get back to the show. We are back. All right. So, what I want to do now is I want to listen to Council Member Dr. Johnson's kind of like rebuttal, like the rationale that he has for not supporting this bill. I'm going to interrupt him a little bit less because he kind of says a lot that I already agree with, but I'll interrupt him periodically just to kind of throw in my additional thoughts. But what I want you to hear how some of your council members engage and even debate issues, or at least how they should. This was a good example. So when they're in disagreement, because I think we kind of have this view that, our elected representatives are retards and that they say dumb things, which is actually true in many cases. But there's also those cases where, hey, they're making some interesting points. They're talking about things. They're trying to use a little bit of foresight. And maybe they're correct, maybe they're not, but that's what we should expect out of them. So before I play this, though, I want you to realize that Dr. Johnson and we frequently disagree. So there was a while back where I went to city council and I spoke against legislation that I believe would add penalties for hate crimes. And as I was leaving, Dr. Johnson, he passed by me as I left and he was like, man, he's like, I disagree with you, man. And then we shook hands and we had a, smile and went about our way. So very cordial. And then when he attended the Libertarian Party of Duval County's town hall before he was elected onto city council, he acknowledged more than one time that his positions on the local stadium, and I think a couple of others, were positions that libertarians would reject. So in other words, what I'm doing is I'm telling you, like, even though him and I have a lot of agreement on this particular issue, we still have plenty of policy differences. Okay. So this is why I'm America's most objective libertarian, because I can oppose you on Tuesday, support you on Wednesday, and go back to opposing you on Thursday. That's what I can do. And hopefully, that rubs off on my audience. You guys learn to do that as well. And you do it even better than I can. So let's play this video here and we'll hear what he had to say. Where did I go?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. While I do appreciate my colleague and his work toward this, I find that what he's said is just not rooted in reality. When I look at the things that are said, they seem to be partisan talking points and thus nonsensical. It says here that we were dealing, and I must say that as we deal with this bill, that we were dealing with an open border situation. That's just not true. It may be in his limited view of the world as to what it is, but unfortunately, that's just not, again, in reality. It was not an open border situation, and it wasn't a crisis. In fact, some of the research shows that there were only 324 people that came into this city that were estimated to be illegal. So the 20 million.
Okay, so that's an interesting point that he makes here. Like, now, he's right. Strictly speaking, there was not an open border issue, but a lot of that's going to be based on how do you define open border. So as a libertarian, I'm going to say that an open border is one that has very little or no limits, right? Restrictions. That's what I would consider to be an open border. And then closed border, I don't think we can do quite the opposite definition, but we can say that a closed border is really heavy on limits and regulation, right? And then you have this variation in between. As I've said before, I prefer an Ellis Island style. So that would actually be closer to, I guess you could say closer to open borders. Um, it would be very limited on the restrictions for people coming over. So I'm probably closer to the open borders, but a lot of it's going to depend on what do you mean when you say open borders. And I think unfortunately, we do not have the proper language to accurately have conversations about open and closed border. So we have to constantly make sure that we iterate what do we mean in this particular case by an open border, right? But I do believe that he is correct. Now, if your argument is that the Biden administration intentionally facilitated 20 million illegal immigrants, that's not an open border situation. That's literally your government just importing people in. That's a different story. So again, we have to be very careful about the terminology that we use. The other thing, he said 324 people. That's if you will notice, that is the first time that somebody has put a number on how many, people are here. Now, is that number accurate? Don't know. What span does that account for? Were there other? So it's possible that 324 was grabbed from a year where the estimation was the least, right? To make it sound better. Like maybe you had 324 in one year, but the year prior, maybe you had 3,000, right? Whatever. But I will say this. Let me put this up on the screen here. So this is an article from May, and it says Jacksonville is among 15 cities with the most population growth in 2024, according to the U.S. Census Bureau. So we're going to get down here, and it says, according to the U.S. Census Bureau's vintage 2024 estimates, which analyze growth from 2023 to July 2023 to July 2024, the South experienced the highest average population growth of any region. It goes on to see, we can go down here, and here's the chart. Here's a list of the 15 cities with the largest numeric increase in that time frame. And we see that Jacksonville is number 10 on the list with 16,365 people coming in to Jacksonville. These are known people. These are documented. Now, does it include illegal immigrants? I don't know. But we have at least some record of documentation for July of 23 to July of 24, 16,000 people. That put us at number 10. So then what we have to ask ourselves is how many people likely came through that were illegal along the way? And to estimate that, one way you might be able to do it, if we had the time and we wanted to dig in, is to go back and look at historical records and say, all right, year by year, how many people did we at any point or in any given year, how many people came in that we know about, right? 16,000, 10,000, 5,000, whatever the case may be, right? So then we can get an estimation or an understanding of how many people were here or came here every year. Then what we can do is we can find any records of known illegal immigrants, any estimations, anything. And then we can say, all right, what years do we have that information for? Then what we can start doing is we can start building a picture. It's not a full-on knowledge, because the only way that you can fully acknowledge something is to have actual numbers. But we can make estimations, and we can say, well, if the average documented persons, right, legal residents, citizens, whatever, if the average was, say, somewhere between 10 and 16,000, depending on which year you look at it, right? If that was the number of increase in any given year, somewhere between 10 and 16,000, then we can presume that it's going to be far fewer for illegal immigrants. You just presume that, right? And so then we can start saying, okay, well, let's estimate this. How do we estimate it? Well, we can do some reporting. We can dig into we can work with organizations that might deal with illegal immigrants, right? There are ways to figure this out. Now, again, there's two ways that you can do this. You can actually get a count. You can do, or I guess three ways. You can actually get a count. You can do an estimation. So if you say, all right, we're going to count this many people here, and this is going to be representative of the whole, right? You could do it that way. So it's an actual count. You can do a count, and then you can extrapolate and say, based on this information, counting out of these 100 people, we found 5. So therefore, we're going to estimate that for the whole population, it's going to be this many, right? You could do some math like that. Or you could look at other information. You can say, let's kind of look at some other information that we know we have, and then we can evaluate from there. One way or another, you can find out something so that when a council member comes forward and says, I have this bill, I want people to support it, they can say, just like Dr. Johnson did, this is the estimated number by such and such group. Then we can determine whether or not that estimation is a good estimation or not, right? That would at least be preferable to nothing. So that's what I mean. And I didn't dig in deep because honestly, I think there are bigger problems with the bill and we don't really need to. I think you should have left it at reporting. That would have been useful. Let's continue on because I do want to hear the rest of Dr. Johnson's commentary.
Number that my colleague continues to bring up just again is nonsensical. It also looks to be that there are federal laws with public housing and public assistance. And when you look at these laws that are put in place, they're meant to protect the people of this community. And when I say this community, I mean the people of America. These federal laws are put in place so that people who are not here legally don't get access to those services.
Okay. I mostly agree. Like you said, these laws are here to protect people. I think that's what we like to believe. Okay. But I just wanted to voice a little bit of disagreement here because I am agreeing with him on some part, in part, but no, there are plenty of laws that do not benefit Americans or people in this country. There are plenty of laws that do more harm than good. That's the thing. So let's just make sure we're clear about that. Let's continue.
But I think the big thing for me is something that was said earlier by my colleague, Councilman Boyland, about unintended consequences. So often we make these sweeping indictments and we decide that this is the thing that we need to do and this is how we need to do it. And we don't look at the consequences or the faults that come thereof. I spoke earlier as well about those people who may not even know. And I happened to run into someone in that space, not recently, but it happened. A person that I was working out with at the gym, Mr. Chair, the guy didn't know that his parents had him in the United States illegally, had gone to school, had done all the things you were supposed to do. And until he went to try to go to school and work and get his birth certificate and do all the things that you do when moving forward in life, he didn't know that his parents had come to this country illegally. That was one of the reasons why the Dreamers program was so important, because it was about helping people who didn't even know they needed help at the time. And so when I look at...
Okay, so we're going to kind of disagree there. I don't think that we need legislation to help people. The only legislation that we need is to protect the rights of people, like your right to self-defense, your right to self-ownership, those kind of things. Protect your rights. You could also argue and say we need some legislation to help resolve disputes. Maybe there's a property dispute. Hey, my neighbor's tree fell down on my house. Who has to pay for it? Is it his fault? Is it the hurricane's fault? Blah, blah, blah. We can work out those kind of things through legislation. But I do not believe that we should be passing legislation that explicitly helps people, because in order to do that, you are basically going to have to take from one and give to another. Otherwise, how are you helping them? So I still have some disagreement with Dr. Johnson here.
A piece of legislation like this, where we blanket and attack organizations that are already taxed with a great deal of work to do, I think we must be more intelligent in the work that we do. We must do more research and understand that we are coming from a place of reality and of trying to help people. My first responsibility is to help our citizens, is to make sure that I'm a good steward of taxpayer dollars. But at the end of the day, I'm still a human. I'm still a person. And so when an unintended consequence means that there are people who may not receive health care, or people who may not feel comfortable coming forward and having a conversation, I've got a major issue with that. And I do believe that in many ways, while this may be coming from a good place, and I respect this bill sponsor, and I certainly consider him a friend, and while I do believe that this is coming from a good place, I just don't believe that it meets the threshold of having the proper research to be a piece of legislation that I can stand behind.
Perfect. Right. That last bit there. Perfect. It doesn't have the proper research that meets the threshold to stand behind. That should really be it. And I think that was, I don't agree with everything he said. And him and I will have plenty of other policy disagreements. Probably more policy disagreements with Council Member Dr. Johnson than Council Member Diamond. Like, I will probably be more in agreement overall with Rory Diamond, even though I oppose this particular bill. Okay. But I thought it was worth playing that because he made some good points. And I think at the end of the day, when he ended his commentary, he said, look, you don't have the necessary information. We need more members on city council to talk like that and to look at that when they're presented a bill to support. And they should say, have you met the threshold to show that there is a need, that you know exactly what problem you're solving? Because when you don't, you open the door to unintended consequences, right? Or you have to start making exceptions, which means effectively you're nullifying what you're trying to do. If your goal, if you believe that there's a lot of illegal immigrants that are using taxpayer dollars, city resources here in Jacksonville, and you want to stop that, okay? You need to know how many and where they're getting them from. Because if the larger share, let's just say that 30%, and I'm making up a number. Let's say that let's say we do a study and we determine that 30% of them are getting resources from UF Health, right? And then let's say that out of the 70% that's remaining, half of those are getting them from private entities, which this bill does not address. This bill only says if you're taking taxpayer money and you're illegal, that you can't, and they're going to cut that off. Okay. So if we narrow it down and we find out that the reality is that maybe of all the money, of all the immigrants, only like 20% of them are even getting taxpayer, money from the taxpayers, basically services paid for by taxpayers. Then we pass this legislation and we do all this stuff. We've created work for everybody to solve what? To get what benefit? And then will that actually, at the end of the day, go toward lowering my tax bill in the first place? Because we're having this problem with Doge, right? Doge found all this stuff. Now, was it the trillions and trillions that they could have found from the defense and all? No, but they found a lot. And then what happened? Nothing. We didn't get it. They didn't stop the spending, and they sure as hell didn't stop taking the money in the first place. So if we say, okay, well, immigrants can't have that, but then we still keep taking the money, you're still taking from me. Taxation is theft. It was theft at the beginning of the show. It's theft in the middle of the show. It'll be theft at the end of the show. Okay. Just because I might be a little bit more willing, to tolerate some level of theft for, like, I don't know, a library or a park, doesn't mean it's not theft. It doesn't mean that we shouldn't evaluate it and be very critical of where we're spending it. But if you're telling me, hey, we're going to take money from these people that might have come from another country to escape a really, really bad situation, we're going to take this money and we're not going to let them have it. But then we're going to go over here and we're going to allow the government to waste it on this other. You might as well at least help the person, because government's very good at wasting money on garbage that doesn't even help people. In this particular case, you could be taking money that actually has legitimate, real life humanitarian value and then diverting that money somewhere else. Now, if you're giving it back to me, well, you're not going to really get too much argument. Like, I'm all about reducing the tax bill and just giving it back to me. I don't think government should be paying for much of anything. So if you say, hey, we're going to take money away, and we're not going to let illegal immigrants use these services, and then the next step is, hopefully to remove those services altogether and tell the free market to figure it out, I'm on board. You got me right there. But that's not what's happening. And I think there's a lot of unintended consequences. All right, let's start wrapping this up a little bit. Let's take a look at some of the language in the bill. Okay, I got to put myself back here. Give me a second because I made myself really, really small. So we'll do this. Okay, boom, there we are. All right. So this is some of the language that's actually in the bill. So this is Ordinance 2025-138. This is under the reporting section, section 1, and this is about federal grants. The city is required to provide a list of all grants between the city of Jacksonville, Duval County, and the federal government and any of its offices, divisions, and agencies. You know what? I'm going to say I like that. That is a good idea. We should always know what kind of grants and are floating around in our city. We should be able to. I should be able to go to the city website and then just look up and see any grants that are available. Not necessarily so I can get one, but I guess for that too, if they're in existence. But more so that I can say, where is my money going? What is it paying for? Right? We should never have a USAID type issue. But I'm willing, and I'm not saying there is one, but I'm willing to bet that in the same vein that a lot of people didn't know where their money was being spent with USAID at the federal level, there's a lot of money in Jacksonville and your city too that's being spent and you don't know where it is. So we should always be able to go and find out where's our money going. Okay, so I'm good with that. Let's see the next one here. Confirmation that the city of Jacksonville is in compliance with all applicable federal and state anti-discrimination laws, rules, regulations, and policies. I'm good with that. I have no issue. Okay, so give it another pass. We're good. We should be in compliance. Or if we're not in compliance, we should all be aware of it and we should know exactly why we're not in compliance and what the potential consequences are. That way, I can hold my city council responsible if they end up getting in a fight with the state government or the federal government. So I'm not opposed to the idea that we push back at the state and federal government. But I do think that unless we have a specific purpose for being out of compliance, if we're deliberately we should be deliberate, right? We shouldn't just not be in compliance because we're lazy. That's not acceptable. So that's good there. This next one here. So provide a list and explanation of any employment practices or other city policies related to the application of diversity, equity, and inclusion measures. What? We're talking about taxpayer money and immigrants.
One of these things is not like the others. One of these things doesn't belong. Can you tell which thing is not like the other by the time I finish this song?
Okay, I had to amuse myself a little bit. I'm trying to make the bill reviews a little bit more entertaining, and there's only so much I could do with my voice. So hopefully that meets it. But yeah, why are we including DEI in this? This is my problem with bills, right? When it's a bill, it should be focused on one thing and one thing only. If you have an issue with DEI, you can figure that out later. That has nothing to do with immigration. This is basically the big, beautiful bill, but it's like a tiny, tiny version of it. And this is how we get big, beautiful bills, because we tolerate this idea that we can have things that are unrelated in the same bill. I get it. It's only 7 pages. You could read it in your lunch break, right? That's not the point. The point is the bill should be the smallest bill possible, and it should touch only the things in our lives that it absolutely has to. And if there's another need that's unrelated, that should go into a different bill so that you can have a conversation. It's possible that there is a need to deal with DEI in a stronger way in a separate bill. But you're doing it in this bill. And so you're just going to get some dumb report that says, oh, we've got DEI over here. But it doesn't even do anything, right? You're just going to provide a list and an explanation. Then what? Well, then you're going to have to pass more legislation. Well, guess what? That legislation, that should be coupled with this requirement to provide a list. You should have legislation that says provide a list. And if any of those employment practices or policies fit this criteria, then they're going to be scheduled for deletion, something like that, right? That should be a separate bill. So on that point, fail. Come on, guys. All right, information regarding the number of unauthorized aliens, if any, residing in public housing under the jurisdiction and control of the city or any of its independent agencies. I agree with that. I'm okay with reporting, right? Figure it out. Public housing. Who are we housing? Because here's the thing. It's not just we need to know so that we can start kicking people out. There might be better solutions. We cannot get to those solutions if we don't have the right information. In this particular case with this bill, Rory Diamond is absolutely wrong. He is wrong past the part where it's reporting. We should not be doing anything until we know exactly what scope of the problem, if there even is one, that needs to be solved. What if the problem is very, very small and there is a way to resolve it by doing something else, by simply publishing information? We could do that. Then we don't need laws. Why? Laws come with force. Force from an entity that has a monopoly on violence. Your city government, your state government, your federal government, they all have a monopoly on violence. What do I mean by that? I mean that they pass legislation passes in those bodies and is enforceable up, and the enforcement can be up to throwing somebody in jail, taking their money, potentially even worse than that, right? Like it's that meme, and I don't have it available, but it's like an officer. He's walking by some kids, and he's like, "Doing those drugs are going to mess up your life." And then you see in the next scene, he's arresting the kid. Then the kid goes to jail. Then the kid ends up getting out of jail, and then he's a bum and he's homeless and he has no money because he spent all this time in jail rather than, at least possibly being a productive member of society. And then in that final graph, or the final graphic, the officer walks by and he's like, "Yep, told you." Yeah, but you played a role in that, right? Like that's the problem that we have. The government will play a role in this because it has this. It can enforce all these rules up to and including actual violence. Now, normally that's not the case because people just comply. But if you don't comply, there is violence backing that. We should not be passing bills with the backing of potential violence when we don't even know the problem. That's unacceptable. That's not small government. That's not limited government or anything else that Republicans claim to be. This bill, reject it. City council should all reject. I hope they're watching. Reject it and tell them go back and make it a bill that identifies the problem first. Then we can talk about what we might need to do. That's what I've got for you. All right, let's take a look at the last comments here. And then let's see what you guys are saying. There's an answer. Keith says maybe we can use AI to educate adults. Hopefully so. I saw some questions in there about Dr. Johnson's PhD. I don't know what he has a PhD in. Maybe it's something trivial, that's not really like, I don't want to say trivial, but maybe it's not an engineering degree. Maybe he's got a degree in gender studies. I don't really know, but he has one, and I try to be courteous when I can. I become discourteous pretty quickly when people are jerks, but if you're not a jerk to me, I try to be courteous. That's what I try. I'm not always successful. I'm a person. Let's see what else we got. Immigrants can't have it, neither can citizens. It's the government's money now. That's basically how it works. The government is acting like this is all their money, right? And they're failing to realize, as I pointed out, that Donna Deegan won by a significant majority. So if Trump has a mandate, then surely she has one too. But nobody wants to talk about that. Nobody wants to engage in logical conversations. And I say nobody, I mean, obviously like not nobody, I am, and people in the comments are, but a lot of our representatives, they don't want to apply the standard that they're saying works for them to their opponents. No, they don't want to do that. Let's see. Taxation is extortion. That's fair. I just like to call it theft. I think it's simpler, but it works either way, right? Because the government's like, you will give us this money or else. That's extortion. It's not really theft technically, because theft would be like the government just come and taking it, whether I know about it or not. But instead, what they really do is they basically use the threat of force to say you will pay it, or your company pays it on your behalf, through your paycheck, whatever. Let's see. Let's see here. I think that's about it. I don't think there's anything else I can say. So, Time Surfing Alien points out government shouldn't pay for much of anything. Citizens shouldn't pay for much government. That is a great note to end this episode on. You are absolutely correct, Time Surfing Alien. We should, whatever we pay for should be itty bitty bitty. What I tell people when they say, what's a libertarian? I go, think of it like this. If government is currently the size of a beach ball, they're like, yep. And I go, I want it to be the size of a marble. And so far, everybody that I've said that to goes, yeah, that's a good idea. All right, folks, until tomorrow. But it was great seeing you guys today. Hope you learned a lot. Thank you for watching, and I hope you found this episode informative and inspiring. Be sure to catch me Monday through Friday, 7:30 a.m. for an informed discussion on politics and culture. Make sure that you're subscribed to my YouTube channel, or if you prefer my Rumble channel, you can go to youtube.libertydad.com, or you can go to rumble.libertydad.com. While you are there, let me know how I'm doing by leaving me a comment. You can also become part of the community by heading over to libertydad.locals.com. Remember, if you're a champion of liberty, your business is people and your product is liberty. I want you to have a great week. Catch you next time. But for now, I'm out.